So when my son was about 2 or 3 years old, we took him to this little amusement park that was at a beach, and he saw this little ride. It was cars that went around very, very slowly. And the track was constructed in such a way that the car would go around and then it would go out of sight just for a second and come back into view again as it came back around this big wide pole for the parents anyway to be able to see the children. So we put him on the ride, and the attendant came over and put the metal bar down, and my son rested his hands on the metal bar. He just kind of rested them there, and then he was so excited he started to, like, yell at us, "Mommy, mommy, daddy, daddy." He wanted us to see him, and all the kids were excited before the ride started. Well, as soon as the attendant pressed the button for the ride to actually start, it lurched, and then it started, and it was smooth from that point on. That lurch caught my son off guard, and when that car lurched, it threw a wrench in all of his plans for that moment. And he began to scream and cry and holler, and the ride was going around already, so we couldn't stop it. He comes back around the first time, and he's still screaming and he's crying, and he's just really kind of just losing it. And I tried to calm him down, and it's going to be all right, honey, it's going to be all right. And he wasn't hearing any of that, so he continues to go back around again. And slowly it made its way back around, and I'm looking at the attendant because at this point I could hear him screaming from the other side as it was coming back around, and he got back around and was still crying. So I said to the attendant, "Can you stop the ride, please?" And the attendant said, "Where the ride is right now, unless it is an extreme emergency, we're not allowed to stop it." So he heard me asking the attendant, for assistance, and the attendant couldn't help me, and I started to get a little upset because now he's committed to this ride. So he looked at me, and when he could see that I was upset, he became even more upset. And the whole time I'm getting more upset, and with the attendant was trying to tell me he couldn't stop it, and I understood his life wasn't in danger, like his physical life wasn't in danger, and he wasn't in danger of falling out or being thrown out or anything like that. So he goes back around one more time, but this time when he comes back around, it's as if he had this look on his face like, my mom, who is pretty much all powerful in my life, and my dad, my parents, they're not going to be able to help me. And this man who is over this ride isn't going to be able to help me. And so he got this resolute, this resolved look in his eyes, like, if no one's coming for me, then I'm going to have to see about myself. And that bar that he initially had rested his hands on, instead of resting his hands this time, he clamped down on that bar with all of his might, and he stared ahead as if, I'm going to go ahead and ride this thing out. And so while his face was still tear-streaked and his little nose was still running and everything, he stopped making any sound, grabbed that bar, and rode all the way around again. Well, at first I was a little like, well, what's going on? Is he shocked? What's going on with him? So when he came back around the next time, I started to say, honey, look at me, look at me, look at mommy, look at mommy. He wasn't making any sound at all. He just clamped down to that bar, stared straight ahead. He wouldn't look at me. All he knew was, I'm going to ride this thing out. Now, to me, again, the ride's going, I don't know, 1 mile, 2 miles an hour. It wasn't going fast at all. It was the pace of a child's crawl. But to him, in that moment, that ride, he was going 90 miles an hour on the Autobahn, and his life was in jeopardy, and the brakes had given out. That's how he looked. Like, I gotta land this baby, I think there was probably maybe 2 more times for him to come back around. And each time he had that look on his face. He wouldn't look at me. He wouldn't look up. He just had that bar, and he was holding on to it. He was frozen to that bar, and he had that little, little grimace on his face, and he went all the way around it. So the ride eventually came to an end. The man went to him first because he saw that was the child that was in the most distress on the ride. And it probably lasted, in my mind, the ride lasted forever because my child was in distress. And for him, it probably did too. But the ride probably was 30 seconds, a minute. I don't know. It wasn't a lot. But again, you have to look at things relatively as to who is experiencing them and when they're experiencing it. And so he came over and he lifted the bar up, and my son got out, and his face was still a little streaked from the crying and everything. And he walked over to us, and he was kind of shaken still a little bit by it, and I'm still a little bit shaken. But in that moment, he kind of gave me a little smile, like, I did it, I made it through. And so I thought, well, I'm going to ask him, because I don't ever want him to look at anything and think that thing terrified me and I'm scared of it. But I said to him, do you want to try again? Do you want to go again? And he said, just as calm as you please, he said, nope, I do not. And he said, let's go. And I remember we just fell out laughing in the moment. And he was kind of doing that laughing you do where like I made it out with my life, that kind of crazy laugh. And I was laughing like, oh my God, what just happened? I use that moment to this day. Anytime I feel like I'm in a moment where things don't go as planned, see that lurch of the car when it first started, things didn't go as planned with him. He didn't see that when he first saw the ride. All he saw was children having a good time, and he wanted to be a part of that. He wanted to experience it. So he got on it, but things didn't go as planned. And that violent lurch shook him up. And in life, sometimes things will happen to you where you think things are going to go a certain way, but they don't. You get shook up in the moment and you want to immediately stop, but things are already in progression. It can be a situation that it's not easy to get out of immediately. Like you're going to have to ride some things out or whatever. And so you have to find out, how am I going to make it through this? Maybe you can't quit your job in that time because finances and everything are of utmost importance or insurance or whatever it happens to be. Bills need to be paid. And so you're in it and you found out that this isn't for me. But you got to make some plans. You got to focus on some things. So my son, he showed in that moment with just in his little toddler humanness, how to handle the situation. Number one, he got into the ride and he rested on what was strong initially, which was the bar. He just rested his hands there. And that's all he used it for, was just to rest. And that's how the foundation of our life should be. Whatever it is that you see as strong and durable, that's supposed to be a place of rest and safety. So he rested his hands there in that initial moment. Then when the ride lurched, he was like, yeah, I don't know about all this, but it had already started. And so he started to freak out. And that's kind of what we do initially. You come home and you go, this job isn't for me, or this relationship isn't going the way that it should. I can't take it anymore. It's just, I'm losing it. But maybe it's not easy to exit in the moment. As a parent, we are our child's first representation of anything that is supposedly divine or authoritative. He knew my mom, she doesn't play about me. She's going to come see about me. But because I couldn't, I had to determine to let it ride out as well. Even though I probably could have climbed that little barricade they had and handled that man. I knew it wasn't a situation that called for that. So he said to himself, okay, the man isn't going to let this ride stop. My mommy, who I trust and know is all about my best interest, for some reason has decided to let the ride go on. So what are my options? Nobody's coming to see about me in this moment. So I've got to come and see about myself. I've got to use what I've been given to handle this moment. So what did he do? He saw that bar, the same bar that he initially had lightly rested his hands on. He grabbed onto that bar with all his might. His shoulders tensed up and he held on for dear life. And then he began to grimace as if to say, I am resolute in this moment. I'm going to ride this bad boy till the wheels fall off if I have to, but it's not going to, end my life. So he's going around, and in that moment where he's going around, where he has decided to focus, where he has decided to hold on to what he knew was firm and strong, I began to say to him, look at mommy, because I want to make sure that he's okay. Because he wasn't looking at me and he had stopped speaking and everything. He just decided, like, I got to handle this. I got to handle this situation. And I'm not saying, just don't pray, don't, look to, what you feel like is the authority. But in certain moments, you just have to go within yourself. So I'm trying to break his boundary at that moment. Look at mommy, look at me. Because I wanted to see that he was okay. I was going to see if I could make him laugh or smile, but he wasn't there for that. See, sometimes you're going through something and your friends might try to come and say, come out with us, or do this with us, or, well, you're not like you used to be. We need you to be this person for us in this moment, because it's going to make us feel better knowing that you are doing this or that. And you have to say, right now I'm having my phone off, or right now I'm not necessarily coming to all the events that we used to have, or right now I'm not doing the thing that makes you comfortable with me, because I have to see about myself. And so that's what he did. He didn't let me disturb his boundary, and he kept going. And then when the ride finally came to an end, he let the man put the bar up. And when I came and said, wow, you did that, you handled that, but I want to make sure you're okay. Do you want to try it again? He said, no, I do not. And a lot of times what that indicates to me is sometimes we try things again to make sure that we can do them. And it's not always necessary. You made it through. You don't have to keep going through the same trials and situations and circumstances and relationships and the same types of drama just to prove that you're strong. You know, they say that a lot of the things that we go through when we get older, especially people who have suffered trauma and they are codependent or they have certain behaviors that are indicative of having gone through certain trauma in life, you know, a lot of things is us trying to correct the wrong of our relationships. You had parents that were not there for you. They were neglectful, and so you find relationships that are the same way, hoping that you can change this person. Well, the only way to change a situation like that is to not get involved with someone who's like that in the first place, you see? So he decided in his little 2-3-year-old mind, I don't need to go through that again. I did it. I made it through. I made it out. I see you trying to see about me, you know, or you're trying to convince me that maybe I need to, like, you know, I can work it. I can make it work this time for me. He had no need to do that, but he knew somewhere deep on the inside of him, I'm assuming, that if he had to do that right again, that he could make it through. He knew the tools. He had the tools. Hold on, focus, set your boundaries, look ahead to the end game. You know, he knew that he had those tools. And so as we practice any form of self-care, radical self-care especially, you're going to do things that to those on the outside looking in aren't going to always line up with what societal expectations are. Some people might come for you in a way that shows that they may not have your back in the first place, and some come for you and they really do have your back, but they still want you to do it the way they would have you do it because they're uncomfortable with the way you're handling situations. Sometimes they may even start to get hysterical even after you've decided that you're no longer hysterical or upset about the situation. But you have to remind them, this is my life, and this is what needs to be done for me to experience healing and wholeness. Does it mean that we don't accept help from those in the outside or from those people who love us? But even with that, we have to judge what is good for us in various seasons of our lives. Because there's some times in your life where you're going to have to adopt this notion, ain't nobody coming to see about me in this moment. And it's not because you're alone and no one really loves you and you don't really truly have help. It just means that you have to become strong and build the muscle to move forward for yourself. Any good parent, any good leader, anyone who you follow should always be about the business of helping you build your own spiritual, mental, emotional, physical muscle. Because if they're not there for some reason, they want to make sure you're going to be okay. So when you adopt that mentality, it's not like an every man is I'm an island and I don't need anyone. It's to bring about a place of self-sufficiency within yourself so that you can make it through what you perceive to be or what possibly is your darkest hour. And have a resolve that you don't always have to keep going through the same old over and over again, trying to prove to yourself or anyone else that you're strong. Show up for yourself. Be present for yourself.
Sometimes when we don't know the word.